going to read a select passage from The Crooked Staircase by Koontz. It's a really long book that I haven't gotten to the end of yet. It kind of freaks me out, but this part that I had read previously, I think it's interesting, and for some reason stands out in my mind, and something that I thought maybe hold on to this spot. At 7 o'clock on that night in March, during a thunderless but heavy rain pounding as loud as an orchestra of kettle drums, Sarah Holdstick finally left the offices of Paradise Real Estate, carrying her briefcase in her left hand, open purse slung over her left shoulder, right hand free for a crossbody draw of the gun in the purse. She boarded her Ford Explorer, threw back the dripping hood of her raincoat, and drove home by way of familiar suburban streets on which the foul weather had settled a strangeness, an apocalyptic gloom that matched her mood. Not for the first time in the past 2 years, she felt as if somewhere ahead of her, reality itself must be eroding, washing away, so that she might come to the crumbling edge of a precipice, with nothing beyond but a lightless, bottomless abyss. Silver needles of rain pleated the darkness with mystery and threat. Any vehicle that followed her more than 3 blocks elicited her suspicion. The Springfield Armory Champion 45 ACP was nestled in her open purse, which stood on her briefcase within easy reach on the passenger seat. Originally, she hadn't wanted a weapon of such a high caliber, but she had eventually realized that nothing smaller would so reliably stop an assailant. She had spent many hours on a shooting range, learning to control the recoil. She had once lived in a gated community with an around-the-clock security guard, in a paid-off 12,000-square-foot residence with a view of the Pacific Ocean. Now she owned a house 1/4 that size, encumbered by a fat mortgage in a neighborhood with no gate, no guard, no view. Starting with little money, by the age of 40 she had built a modest fortune as a Southern California real estate agent, broker, and canny investor, but most of it had been taken from her by the time she was 42. At 44, though bitter, she was nonetheless grateful that she hadn't been rendered penniless. Having clawed her way to the top once before, she'd been left with just enough assets to start the climb again. This time she would not make the mistake that had led to her ruin. She would not marry. On the street where Sarah lived, storm runoff overwhelmed the drains to form shallow lakes wherever the pavement swaled. Her Ford cast up wings of water in a false promise of magical flight. She slowed and swung into her driveway. Lights glowed in some windows, controlled by a smart house program that, after nightfall and in her absence, created the illusion of occupancy and activity. She remoted the garage door and, while it rolled up on its tracks, put her open purse in her lap. She drove inside, the drumming of rain on the roof relenting as the welcome electronic shriek of the alarm system inspired a greater sense of safety than she had felt since setting out for work that morning. She did not switch off the engine. With the doors still locked, she kept her left foot hard on the brake, her right poised over the accelerator, and she shifted into reverse. She used the remote control again and looked from one of the SUV's side mirrors to the other, watching the big segmented door descend. If someone tried to slip in under it, the motion detector would sense the intruder and, as a safety measure, retract the door. If that happened, the instant the roll-up cleared the roof of the Explorer, she would take her foot off the brake, stomp the accelerator, and reverse its speed into the driveway, into the street. With luck, she might be quick enough to run down whatever son of a bitch had come after her. The bottom rail of the door met the concrete with a soft thud. She was alone in the garage. She shifted the SUV into park, applied the emergency brake, switched off the engine, and got out. The last exhaust fumes threaded the air. The Ford shed rain on the concrete floor and ticked as the engine cooled. After unlocking the connecting door to the house, she stepped into the laundry room, turned to the keypad, and entered the 4-number code that disarmed the security system. At once she reset the alarm to the at-home mode, which activated only the sensors at the doors and windows, leaving dormant the interior motion detectors, allowing her to move freely through the residence. She hung her raincoat on a wall hook where it dripped onto the tile floor. Purse slung from her left shoulder, briefcase in her right hand, she opened the inner laundry room door and went into the kitchen, realizing an instant too late that the air was redolent with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. A stranger with a pistol stood at the dinette table on which rested a mug of coffee, and Sarah's copy of that morning's Los Angeles Times with its banner headline, "Jane Hawk, indicted for espionage, treason, murder." The barrel of the weapon was elongated by a silencer. The muzzle as dark and deep as a wormhole connecting this universe to another. Sarah halted, shocked not merely because her home had been violated in spite of all her precautions, but also because the intruder was a woman. 20-something with long black hair parted mid-forehead and tucked behind her ears, with eyes as black and direct as the muzzle of the gun, with no makeup or lipstick and no need of any, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, dressed in a black sport coat and a white shirt and black jeans. She looked severe, and yet beautiful and somehow unearthly, as if death had undergone an image makeover and at long last revealed her true gender. "I'm not here to hurt you," the intruder said. "I just need some information. But first, put your purse on the counter and don't reach for the gun in it." Although Sarah suspected that it would be foolish to hope to deceive this woman, she heard herself say, "Whatever you are, I'm not like you. I'm just a real estate agent. I don't have a gun." The stranger said, 2 years ago, you purchased a Springfield Armory Super Tune Champion with a Novak low-mount fixed sight, polished extractor and ejector and feed ramp, and a King extended safety. You ordered it with an A1 style trigger precisely tuned to a 4-pound pull, and you had the entire weapon carry beveled, all its edges and corners rounded so that it won't snag during a quick draw. You must have done a lot of research to come up with an order like that, and you must have spent many hours on a shooting range learning how to handle the piece, because then you applied for and received a concealed carry permit. Sarah put the purse on the counter. "The briefcase, too," the intruder directed. "Don't even think of slinging it at me." When she did as told, Sarah's gaze fixed on a nearby drawer that held cutlery, including a chef's French knife and a cleaver. "Unless you're a champion knife thrower," the stranger said, "you'll never be fast enough to use it. Didn't you hear me say that I don't mean you any harm?" Sarah turned from the cutlery drawer. "Yeah, I heard, but I don't believe it." The woman regarded her in silence for a moment and then said, "If you're as smart as I think you are, you'll warm up to me. If you're not that smart, this will get ugly when it doesn't need to be. Sit down at the table." "What if I just walk out of here? Then I'll have to hurt you a little after all, but you'll have brought it on yourself." The intruder's face, the strength of its features, the clarity of its lines, its refinement, was as purely Celtic as any face in Scotland or Ireland. But those eyes, so black that the pupils and irises were as one, seemed to belong in a different countenance. The contrast was somehow unsettling, as if the face might be a mask, its every expression unreliable, while the truth that otherwise might be read in her eyes remained secreted in their darkness. Although Sarah had promised herself that she would never again be intimidated by anyone, after a brief staring match, she sat where she'd been told to sit. The tropical stillness of the storm succumbed to a sudden wind that cast shadows of rain against the windows. Jane Hawk sat across from Sarah Holdstack and put her Heckler & Koch .45 compact on the kitchen table. Sarah looked weary, which was not surprising, considering all that she'd been through in the past 2 years. Weary but not defeated. Jane was familiar with that condition. "Your Springfield Champion is a sweet weapon, Sarah, but don't carry it in your purse. Change the way you dress. Get in the habit of wearing a sport coat. Carry the gun in a concealed shoulder rig where you can draw it quickly." "I hate guns. It was a big step for me just to get one." "I understand. But switch to a shoulder rig anyway and get real about security systems like the one you had installed here." Skirling wind rattled rain hard against the glass, disquieting Sarah, so that she looked at each of the 2 kitchen windows as if she expected to see some face of inhuman configuration conjured by the storm. Returning her attention to Jane's, she said, "Get real about my security system? What's that mean?" "Do you know that all alarm companies in any state or region use the same central station to monitor the systems they install?" "I thought each company monitored its own." "Not the case. And certain government agencies have secret, basically illegal, back doors to all those central stations across the country. Do you understand what I mean by back doors? A way into the company's computer the company doesn't know about. I used a back door to your security provider and reviewed your account, learned where your alarm keypads and motion detectors are located, the password you use when you accidentally trigger an alarm and call in a cancellation, the location of the battery that backs up the system during a power failure. Useful stuff for any bad guy to know, though he'd still need the 4-digit disarming code." 2 words belatedly brought a scowl to Sarah's face. "Government agencies? I've had enough of them. Which are you with?" "None. Not anymore. Sarah, the alarm company isn't supposed to have that disarming code. It's something only the homeowner should know. You should program it yourself with the primary keypad, but like a lot of people, you didn't want to bother following the steps in the manual, so you asked the installer to program it for you, which he did, and noted it in your account file where I found it." As if the weight of her mistake pressed on her, Sarah slumped lower in her chair. "I've been living defensively for a long time, but I don't claim to be perfect at it." "Maybe you need to be better, but you don't want to be perfect at it. Only the insane are perfect in their paranoia." "Sometimes I think I've already gone half crazy, the way I live. I mean, the worst happened more than 2 years ago, nothing since. But in your gut, you know at any time he might decide you're a loose end that needs to be tied off." Sarah glanced again at the windows. "Would you like to lower the blinds?" Jane asked. "I always do when I come home after dark." "Go ahead, then sit down again." Having closed the blinds, Sarah returned to her chair. Jane said, "I got in here using an automatic lock-picking gun, supposedly sold only to police. Turned off the alarm with your code, reset it in the at-home mode, and settled down to wait." "I'll change the code myself, but who are you?" Instead of answering, Jane said, "You are on top of the world, selling high-end houses, damn good at it, never a complaint from a client. Then suddenly you're hit with 3 very public lawsuits, all within 2 weeks, alleging fraudulent activities." "The allegations weren't true. I'm aware of that." Then came a seemingly unrelated IRS audit, but not an ordinary audit, one conducted with the assumption of criminal intent, accusations of money laundering. The memory triggered indignation that drew Sarah up straight in her chair. "The IRS agents who came to pour through my books, they were armed, as if I was some dangerous terrorist." "Armed auditors aren't supposed to flaunt their weapons." "Yeah, well, they made damn sure I knew they were packing." "To intimidate you." Sarah squinted as if to focus more intently on Jane's face. "Do I know you? Have we met before?" "Doesn't matter, Sarah. What matters is that I despise the same people you despise." "Like who would that be?" From a jacket pocket, Jane produced a photograph of Simon Yegg and dealt it across the table as if it were a playing card. "My husband," Sarah said, "ex-husband, the vicious shit. I know why I despise him, but why do you?" "Because of the crew he hangs with. I want to use him to get to them. In the process, I can make him profoundly sorry he did to you what he did. I can humble him." Long, lingering resentment pinched Sarah Holdsteck's mouth and pinked her cheeks, the knuckles bone-white in her clenched fists as she spoke about what she'd endured more than 2 years earlier, when she'd been sued by 3 clients in 1 week, which turned out to be the least of the assaults against her. Because the woman's anguish at having been betrayed and played for a fool had not faded with time, Jane found it painful to watch her. Sarah's attorney of 15 years, Mary Wyatt, had assured her that those legal actions were frivolous, that among the accusers there was an appearance of collusion with intent to defame, and that she should not worry unduly. 3 days later, with no explanation, Mary dropped her as a client and declined to accept her phone calls. Another attorney took her on, and the following day changed his mind, while a third lawyer tried to persuade her to settle the suits out of court. A 6-unit apartment building that she owned appeared on an EPA list of structures standing on ground contaminated by highly toxic chemicals, and 3 days thereafter she received a health department summons to appear at a hearing into the dangers faced by tenants of her property. By this time, IRS auditors had been in the offices of her accountant for 6 business days, examining her books in search of evidence of money laundering. Now she poked a finger at the photo of Simon Yegg on the table in front of her. It was a Friday evening. This treacherous snake sat me down for what he called a come-to-Jesus meeting. He claimed my problems were the work of friends of his who he wouldn't name. The smug bastard wanted a divorce. He gave me a property division ultimatum. He'd keep everything he brought into the marriage just 18 months earlier and take 70% of my assets, graciously leaving me start-over money. In return, he'd make the lawsuits go away, have the IRS audit conclude quickly in my favor, and get the apartments taken off the list of contaminated sites. You believed he could do all that? Jane asked. Everything happening to me was so bizarre, surreal, I didn't know what to believe. The change in him was shocking. He'd always been so sweet, so loving. Suddenly, he was condescending, cruel, contemptuous of me. I told him to get out. I said it was my house before we were married, and it would always be my house. What happened to make you back down? Sarah looked at one blinded window, and then at the other, not because anything of the night could be seen, but perhaps because she was embarrassed to meet Jane's eyes. I didn't know he had 3 people with him. They came in from the garage, 2 men and a woman. He gave me to them, and he left. Gave you to them? Sarah opened her fists, regarding her hands as if repulsed by some filth that only she could see. The men held me down. After a silence, Jane said, rape. No, they stripped me naked, cuffed my hands, indifferent, as if I wasn't a woman to them, not a person, just a thing. Her voice had gone flat, deflated of all emotion, as if she had so often examined this memory that she'd worn away its sharp edges and its ability to distress her. But the truth of its enduring effect could be seen in the paleness of her lips, the color burning in her cheeks, and the stiffening of her body as if in defense against a hard blow. They took me to a bathroom, she continued in a voice eerily detached from the cruelty she just described. The woman had filled the tub with cold water, also with ice, cubes from the kitchen ice maker, a lot of ice. They forced me to sit in the tub. Hypothermia is an effective torture, Jane said. Iranians use it, North Koreans, Cubans, when they don't want to mark the victim. One man sat on the toilet. One brought a chair. The woman sat on the tub, edge of the tub. They talked movies, TV, sports, like I wasn't there. If I spoke, she zapped my neck with a taser, then held my head out of water by my hair until the spasms stopped. How long did this go on? I lost track of time, but it wasn't just one session. They did it to me on and off all weekend. Jane listed some symptoms of hypothermia: uncontrollable shivering, confusion, weakness, dizziness, slurred speech. Cold is its own kind of pain, Sarah said. She closed her eyes and bent her head. It might have been mistaken for a woman in prayer, if her hands had not cramped into fists once more. Jane waited in patient quiet, Sarah in the chilly silence of mortification, until Jane said, it wasn't primarily about the pain. Sure, they wanted you to be miserable and afraid, but mainly it was about humiliation, making you feel helpless, submissive, using shame to break your resolve. When at last Sarah spoke, her voice trembled, as if the needled cold of that long-ago ordeal pricked her bones again. The men, when they had to... Jane spared her from the need to say it. When they had to urinate, they did it in the tub. Finally, Sarah raised her head and met Jane's eyes. I never could have imagined such a thing, treating anyone with such contempt. Because you'd never dealt with their type before. I have. The character of the tremor in Sarah's voice changed, no longer occasioned by a memory of cold or humiliation, but by a virulent and righteous anger. Will you do to Simon what those 3 did to me? I don't work that way, Sarah. He deserves it. He deserves worse. Will you ruin him? Possibly. Take his money? Some of it, anyway. Will you kill him? If I force him to tell me what I need to know, other people will probably kill him for ratting on them. Sarah considered that prospect. What's this all about? You don't want to know, but if you hope To get your self-respect back, entirely back, you need to help me. Outside rained and wind. In the mind of Sarah Holdstick, a different but equal turbulence. Then she said, "What do you want to know?" Now confident that it wouldn't be thrown at her, Jane poured a second mug of coffee, brought it to the table, and put it in front of Sarah Holdstick, the fragrant steam rising in serpentine ribbons. As she refreshed her own mug, she said, "Though you've agreed to help me, first there's more you need to hear. Which must mean my situation is even worse than I think. Simon never told you he'd been married 3 times before?" Sarah was surprised for a moment and then not. He said he'd sworn to stay a bachelor, but with me he wanted it to be forever. His third wife said he has a silver tongue. Yeah, and a heart of iron. Jane returned the Pyrex pot to the coffee maker. He seems to choose his wives for 2 reasons. First, they resemble one another. Slim brunettes with blue eyes, 5'6", give or take an inch. The other qualification? Money. They inherited it. Or earned it, as in your case and another. Not enormous fortunes, but serious money. 3 other wives with 4 different divorce attorneys, yet in every case they wanted zip from Simon, while giving him 50 to 70% of their assets. After going through one hell or another. In her chair again, Jane said, pretty much the same hell. People sued them. All kinds of federal agencies suddenly came after them. And at the height of the chaos, ice-cold baths are the equivalent and a dose of intense humiliation. They all broke like me, Sarah intuited, not as if she thought the weakness of the 3 previous wives somehow exonerated her, but as if depressed by the news of Simon's repeated triumphs. Count yourself lucky or wise that you gave him what he wanted after a weekend of abuse. Anyway, your only other choice would have been to kill him. I wish I had, but I was a different person then, so timid. Not timid, James said, naive. His third wife endured 8 days, ice water baths, brutal sessions in a superheated sauna, sleep deprivation, and then came the vicious gang rapes that you escaped. 3 men at a time and never the same 3. She broke. She lives simply now on what he allowed her to keep. She's become agoraphobic, so afraid of the outside world she never leaves her little bungalow. When Sarah drank some coffee, the mug rattled against her teeth. I don't know what outrages the other 2 wives were subjected to, Jane said, but even with his first, Simon didn't need her money. He was already an entrepreneur, with a few highly profitable businesses, largely because of his connections with people in positions of power. Sarah folded her hands around the warm mug and closed her eyes and seemed to be listening to the torrents of rain pummeling the house, but perhaps instead she heard only moments of the past, her ex-husband's sneering voice. In time, she said, I always knew my money was the least of it. What mattered most to him was my total mortification, my shame, my submission. That's why I think he let me live, so he can know I'm out here, changed forever and suffering. Because Sarah was smart enough to understand the implications of 2 final revelations, Jane gave her facts without interpretation. 2.5 years after the divorce, his first wife treated herself to a vacation in France, accompanied by her cousin. On their 3rd day in Paris, both women disappeared. Their remains were found 2 days later in an abandoned building in an arrondissement where they would never have dared to go, where even police are reluctant to patrol because of the Iranian and Syrian gangs that operate there. They had been robbed and beaten to death with lengths of iron pipe left at the scene. In the case of his second wife, 3 years after the divorce, she'd recovered enough confidence to have a boyfriend. They went hiking in Yosemite. At a point where the trail narrowed with a steep drop to one side, maybe one of them slipped over the edge. Maybe the other reached out to halt the companion's fall and was pulled off balance. However it happened, both ended up dead on the rocks 300 feet below. Sarah seemed to want the coffee only for the warmth that the mug imparted to her hands. So I've got 6 months to a year. Unless I kill him in self-defense or someone else kills him because of the information I'm able to pry out of him. I already agreed to help you. I know, Jane said. I've told you this only because I want you to get more serious about carrying that concealed pistol, about your security system, about your life, and how fragile it remains. Gaining Sarah Holdstick's trust had taken Jane Hawk much longer than she would require to get answers to the few essential questions that she had come there to ask. She popped a pill with her coffee. Sarah raised her eyebrows. Acid reducer, Jane explained. Taken with black coffee. Coffee doesn't reflex on me. The mess the world's in, the arrogant elitists who screwed it up, who believe in nothing but power like your ex-husband. That's the acid, why I need this. You have an extra one of those? Jane shook a tablet from the bottle and passed it across the table. So Simon occupies the house you used to own. Sarah swallowed the pill. I hear he is a live-in hottie. I know about the hottie, but there are some things about the house I couldn't get from research. I need you to tell me. Anything, whatever, but maybe it's time I knew your name. Elizabeth Bennet, Jane lied. Like in Pride and Prejudice. Is it? Do you sometimes go as Elizabeth Darcy? Jane smiled, not that I recall. All right, Lizzie. What do you want to know about the house? A few minutes later, Jane changed the subject. I also need some info about certain of his personal habits. When a sudden acceleration of wind drove raindrops against the house with the hard snap of a nail gun barrage, Sarah didn't startle as before or glance at the blinded windows. In a quiet, steady voice, she spoke dispassionately about Simon Yugg, apparently now convinced there was a chance that some justice would be settled upon him. Jane's last item concerned family. You ever meet his brother? Simon has a brother? A half-brother? Same mother, different fathers? His dad died when Simon was 8, his mom 6 years later. No, she divorced the father. He later died in a fire. Mother's not dead. Damn. Did the man ever say a word of truth? His tongue's not made for it. You know a Booth Hendrickson? Never heard of him. He's the half-brother, born in Florida, raised in Nevada, California. Tall, salt and pepper hair, pale green eyes, talks like he's boss in society, $5,000 suits. Rings no bell. He's very high up in the Department of Justice, only a couple of rungs below the Attorney General. Through a network of associates, he seems to have a lot of power in other agencies. Sarah digested that revelation. Her souring expression suggested that she might be glad to have taken the pill Jane had given her. Other agencies, like the IRS? Not just the IRS, he's a unique cross-agency player. What, he and Simon ruined naive women and split the proceeds? I doubt Hendrickson wants a dime. He does it for his brother. How touching. They have different last names. They don't advertise their relationship. Hendrickson has much bigger interests of his own that he wouldn't want compromised by Simon. But they're close, and I was able to link them. You said you were after Simon because of who he hangs with. You mean Hendrickson? Yeah, I'm going to get at Hendrickson through Simon. After Hendrickson, others just as corrupt as those two. Jane got to her feet and picked up the heckling and holstered it. It'll be best for you if you never tell anyone about me or what we discussed. Who would I tell? I don't trust anyone anymore. That'll change if you let it. You're smarter now about who might be rotten. Just remember the pistol rig and new security code. Code tonight, the rig tomorrow. I won't be going to Paris either. Or Yosemite. Sarah went to the back door that led to a patio. Behind her, Sarah said, "Oh my gosh." Jane turned. She saw in the woman's face something that was disconcertingly like awe. I know who you are. Black hair, not blonde. Black eyes, not blue, but it's you. I'm nobody. Sarah didn't say that. Jane, once a decorated FBI agent, was now at the top of the Bureau's most wanted list, the object of a media frenzy. She pointed to the banner headline on the Los Angeles Times. There's no truth in the news, is there? Not about you, not about anything. We're living in a world of lies. There's always truth, Sarah. Under an ocean of deceit, there's truth just waiting. The woman's weariness gave way to an earnest look, to an air of edgy enthusiasm that troubled Jane. Whatever they've done, you're taking it to them. Whatever they're hiding, you're digging it up. She rose from her chair. People, some people anyway, sense we're being manipulated about what to think of you. But we don't know why they want you to be so hated. I wish I had what you have, could do what you're doing. I'm nobody, Jane repeated, though not in the interest of denying her identity. I could be dead tomorrow, if not tonight. You won't be, though. Not you. The fervor in the woman's voice, the shining something in her eyes, chilled Jane for reasons she could not entirely understand. Yes, me, she said, dead sooner than later, or something worse than dead. To discourage a response, she stepped outside with her last word and closed the door. She crossed the concrete patio, hurried alongside the house and into the street, toward the car that she'd parked a block and a half away. The singular chill persisted in her bones, colder than the late March rain. She cast a shadow under the street lamps, which was good. The sharp wind stung her face, and the blown rain blurred her vision, which was also good. The darkness, that of the lowering storm clouds, and especially that of the star-shot sky fixed eternal above the storm, made her feel small and fragile, which was both good and right. Waiting for the heater to bake the chill out of her bones, Jane Hawk sat behind the wheel of her Ford Explorer Sport, staring at a nightscape distorted by rain shimmering down the windshield. Through that fluid lens, the street lamps appeared to quiver, receding like great scaffold-mounted torches along some shadowy road that led to death and onward to damnation. She had purchased her current vehicle from an all-cash black market dealer who worked out of a series of barns on a former horse ranch near Nogales, Arizona. The Explorer Sport had been stolen in the United States and reworked in Mexico, where among other improvements it had been given a purpose-built 825 horsepower 502 Chevy engine. If you had to go on the run, hunted by law enforcement and national security agencies at the federal, state, and local level, you paid to have been an FBI agent who had learned how various criminal enterprises operated and where to find them. At Jane's request, the navigation system had been stripped from the Explorer. If those searching for her got a lead on the vehicle, a GPS would give them her location with such specificity mile by mile that they could take her as elegantly as a bird of prey snatching a field mouse from a meadow. To avoid carrying other locators, she had no smartphone and no computer. The hot air streaming from the dashboard vents warmed her, but failed to alleviate the deeper chill, which wasn't physical. It had gripped her when Sarah Holtsteck regarded her with fervent admiration, if not even reverence. Jane didn't want to be anybody's hero. She had undertaken this fight for two selfish reasons: to restore her husband's reputation because Nick had not committed suicide as the evidence indicated, and to save the life of her only child, 5-year-old Travis, who'd been threatened when her investigation of Nick's death led to the discovery of a conspiracy in some of the highest offices of government and industry. The roots of that cabal spread day by day through a nation of people unaware of their extreme peril. She'd accepted that she might die during this endeavor. Even if she exposed and destroyed the conspiracy, she'd almost certainly afterward be murdered as a matter of revenge. Her enemies were people of great power and wealth, unaccustomed to defeat, and they would not endure it with grace. Travis was hidden away with friends where he wasn't likely to be found. Were she to be killed, he would be raised with love and proper guidance. Her chances of survival, slim as they were, depended on staying tightly focused, on keeping her purpose narrow and her motivation personal, proceeding with confidence tempered by humility. Although the future freedom hung in the balance, she was no Joan of Arc and didn't want to be weighed down by a grand obligation like the one that had inspired the Maid of Orleans at the insistence of adoring crowds, to put on armor and pick up a sword. Charismatic crusaders of that kind were doomed, even in triumph, destroyed by exalted ambition, if not by pride. And what Jane's enemies could do to her, if they brought her down, would be far worse than being burned alive at the stake. She turned on the windshield wipers and drove away from the curb. A difficult task awaited her, and time was running out.